Good morning, everyone. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot of information to cover today. Hopefully all of you can hear me just fine. If anybody's having trouble with your audio, or if we're having trouble with our audio, please just shoot us a little chat in the chat window. It appears to be working okay. I'm Allison Taylor, and my husband Tom Taylor is with me also today. We are Pictures and Stories, and we get to help people create books about their life stories and their personal and family histories. We've created a book, a how-to book and a kit called How to Save Your Life, one chapter at a time. And if you're interested in that kit, we can give you information on how to obtain that. These webinars are in addition to the kit, additional instruction for the processes that are in the kit. And we've opened these up to the general public to our Pictures and Stories mailing list for a little while. So some of you may have purchased the kit, others of you may not, but you'll still find this information quite helpful, we hope. And you can find a lot of this information in articles on our blog, on our picturesandstories.com website as well. So we can go ahead and get started. What we're going to be talking about today is how to choose photos for your life story book. And once you've chosen what photos you want to use, how to prepare them and how to get ready to begin the layout of your book. As I said, we have a lot of information to cover today, so I'm just going to jump into it. A few of the things that we'll be talking about today is, first of all, why we want to use pictures along with our personal histories and why that's so important. Also, we're going to be talking about how to scan and how to handle your files properly for print, and then also give you kind of a workflow for using photos in a book and how that's going to work. Next week, we will be talking in more detail about actually doing a layout of a book, how to put your words and your pictures together. So we'll be going into more detail about that next week. But this week we're going to focus on preparation, how to choose the pictures that you want to use and how to prepare them properly. So why do we want to use pictures along with our stories? It seems it might seem a little self-explanatory, but you'd be surprised at the number of people that we run into who are putting together their life stories, who are a little bit afraid to add too many pictures, or they say, well, I really don't want to add pictures, or I don't want to add too many pictures, I just want to keep it simple. So we want to try to convert you, if you're in that mindset, to the idea of using a lot of photographs, good photographs with your stories. First of all, adding a photo can add emotional impact to the story. This is a photo here of, this is Tom's grandmother, and maybe I'll let him tell the story about this photo. No, he's gesturing to me, he wants me to tell it. Okay. Tom's grandmother is the girl on the right, and if you look at this photo, or on the left, sorry, yeah, the other right. If you look at this photo, it looks like just a really nice, beautiful studio portrait of three little Victorian girls. And it's a lovely portrait. It's very nice. But when you know the story behind it, they're wearing these beautiful dresses. And the story behind this photo is that their mother had made these dresses for these three girls. And she stayed up all night sewing the dresses so that because the photographer was going to be coming to do this family portrait the next day or within a couple of days. And unfortunately, she died suddenly right after completing the dresses. So this photograph was actually taken at their mother's funeral. They had the photographer booked anyway, and so they were able to get this photograph. So when you know the story and you look at this picture, with the story, suddenly the picture adds poignancy to the story itself, but also understanding the story gives you a whole different idea of what the picture is about. So it's a nice combination of the two.
I do also want to say the interesting thing about this particular picture is this was really the beginning of me discovering my grandmother. She had passed away years before I was born, and so I never met her. And as a teenager, I found this picture actually as a negative and printed it and found it very interesting, and it really led to the discovery of me then later interviewing my mother, her brothers and sisters, and really then getting in and finding letters and finding out who my grandmother was. So it was a picture that really drew me into her story and helped me discover her life.
Thanks. Another reason for adding photographs to your book is that it's going to make your book much more compelling to read and for people to enjoy. We've all seen books like this that are full of great historical and genealogical information. You know, maybe many of us have them on our shelves that we've been donated to us by relatives who are the keepers of the family history. And they make great reference material. It's really nice to get these. You just put them on a shelf and then you know where it is when you need the information that's in it. But it's not something that, it doesn't really draw you in and make you want to sit down and read through the whole thing. It looks just a little dry, and like, you know, it might be difficult to read, even though it could be the most compelling story. But if it's not presented in a compelling way, people are not going to be as drawn to reading it. So wouldn't you rather read, you know, this is the same story, the same information, but when it has a pleasing layout, it has shorter columns that make it easier to read, and it's got pictures and some nice typography elements. It just makes it such a much more pleasant experience for the reader, and it will actually draw them into it, and they'll want to sit down and read through the whole thing. Here's another example of a story using a lot of visual elements to it. Genealogical charts. We all have probably, you know, many of us have stacks of these kinds of charts like the one on the left. This is just a basic family group sheet that shows the parents and the children and their pertinent dates and information. The one on the right has, you know, essentially the same information. It's also a family group sheet, but it's much more pleasing to look at, and you get much more of a sense of the family and who they were rather than just looking at the dates on a page. Also, you want to consider your audience and who might be reading this book. And this is your audience. These are your descendants that are going to be reading your life story, and these are the kinds of competition, the things that these kids have available to them at all times. And that's not to say that they will not engage with the book just because they're used to all this electronic information. Everybody, kids included, still love to sit down with a well-designed, beautiful book. It's just a completely different experience, and books will never go away completely. But you have to make your book attractive and pleasing enough to connect with a generation that has been raised on visual media. So you just want to make sure that your book is visually appealing so that they will be interested in reading it. You know, we think books are still relevant and will always be relevant. Just one thing to consider, though, is that as you are putting together all the information to create a book, it might be a great idea to also take that information and put it in some form of digital format as well, so that it can be shared with other people easily online and make it available to more people. There's no reason why you shouldn't do both, a physical book and have digital information available. There's no reason to just choose one or the other. They're both equally important. So A.A. Milne, I love this. He says, organizing is what you do before you do something so that when you do it, it's not all mixed up. So one thing we want to do is to try to help you organize your photos a little bit so that you'll be ready to start the layout on your book. One thing that we want to stress, and that is as you're writing your stories and as you're going through your pictures and trying to decide which pictures you want to use in your book, and also using your pictures as memory triggers for your writing process, what you want to be sure to do is to keep your stories, your text, and your pictures separate until you're done with all the writing. Don't try to put the pictures into, especially into a word processing document as you're writing your book, or you will end up with a big mess on your hands. So next week we'll talk more about that process of it, but at this point you want to just work on your writing and you want to organize your pictures and keep them completely separate until everything is ready to go and you're really well organized. You'll save yourself a lot of frustration. As you start gathering your photos, and hopefully you've been doing this all along, but as you're getting closer to this process of putting them together, I would just, my recommendation would be to focus on, just pull out the pictures that you want to use for this particular project rather than trying to organize all of your photos at once. Otherwise, because the whole organization process could take longer and derail you from getting your book or your project done. So that would be, some people really want to have all their pictures organized before they get to putting them in a book, but I would say, start with the ones that you're going to use for this project, and then you can always go back and organize the other ones later. Just loosely, you can loosely categorize the photos that you're pulling out that you think, I think I might want to use this for this photo, and put them in piles or in file folders that will make it easier for you to sort of keep track of them and find where they are. So when you are choosing what photos to use in your history, what you want to do is shoot for this sweet spot. You have this intersection here between, you have the stories that you've written, and then you have the pictures that you have available, and sometimes those intersect, sometimes they don't. And then you also have your chosen purpose, your audience, and the scope of your book that you have thought about all along during this process. So the best pictures to choose are the ones that go with the story and that also fit with your purpose, audience, and scope. Now, not every picture in your book is going to fit that criteria. Sometimes you have great photographs that don't really necessarily belong to a specific story, but you want to include them anyway. And sometimes they might not directly relate to your purpose or your audience or the scope of your book, but there could be a reason to include them. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but the closer that you get to having pictures that combine all these things together and that hit that sweet spot, the more sense your book is going to make. Look for photographs that have an emotional impact. This photo here came from a book that we did for a client, and this is her family. She was born in Germany, and she went to America just before World War II. And this is a picture that they took of her family after their apartment building was bombed in Germany. And here they are sorting through the rubble looking for whatever belongings that they can find after this bombing. It's an incredibly compelling picture. Not all of us have pictures that are quite this dramatic, but we generally want to look for photographs that do evoke some sort of emotional response. And I would say that emotional impact should take precedence over the quality, the actual physical quality of a photograph. This is a photograph, it's one of the few photos that we have of my grandmother's family. It's my grandmother on the left. And we love this photograph because it really shows something about each of the members of the family. Even though it's, it's grainy, it's got marks on it, it's kind of faded, there's not a lot that we can do to improve it. But it just shows a lot about the family and who they were. And you have her father standing in the background, and he's sort of proudly pointing to the sign on his little general store. Her younger brother looks sort of jaunty in the front, and he was quite a character, and it kind of shows a little bit of his personality. And then it shows my grandmother on the left, and she's leaning affectionately on her mother's shoulder. So it really captures that personality and captures the time and place in which they lived, even though it's technically not a great photo. Use photographs that actually show the relationships between people when you can. On the left, a photo of my grandparents on their honeymoon or just before they got married maybe, and just you can tell by the way she's looking at him that she just absolutely adores him, which she did all of her life. On the right is a picture of her with her college roommate, who was a very close friend. And so these pictures, they really add something emotional to the story. This picture here is a really nice photograph of a lake in Alaska, you know, technically pretty good, and really kind of shows the spectacular beauty of this place in Alaska. You know, it's a nice enough photo. However, this photo that was taken by the same family on the same trip to Alaska is just, even though it's technically not quite as good, it's a little grainy, but it just shows so much more about the relationship between these two family members. And, you know, it shows the car that they were driving, and you get much more of a sense of the family and what it meant for them to be there in Alaska at the time than you do just looking at the picture of the beautiful mountain. Look for pictures that show the personality of the inhabitants as much as you can. Both of these pictures are just really fun to look at because they show people in their natural environment having a good time. I would much prefer, even if it's technically inferior, a photo like this that shows something about the person as opposed to just a really nice studio photograph like this. Again, this is my grandparents', you know, just a very nice Olin Mills type of photograph. It shows accurately what they look like at that period of time, and it's, you know, technically really nice. Photo's not damaged in any way. However, these photographs of my grandfather really show what he was like. He was just such a character and always just the life of the party, and was so much fun and had such a great sense of humor. And so, you know, showing him wearing a funny mask or being Mr. Muscle Man on the beach just so much more captures his personality, even though the photos are not quite as good as the studio photo. I would much rather use these photos that really show off who he was. Also, don't be afraid of photos that might be a little bit faded or yellowed or have other flaws in them. You can do a lot with photo editing software to improve this photo. And this is the quintessential photo of my grandmother in the kitchen, which is where she was, you know, 80% of her life, and just always nurturing and taking care of everyone and making sure that we were all fed extremely well. And so even though this photo on the left, you know, it's kind of yellowed and it doesn't look that great, I don't want to just exclude that photo, because otherwise it's such a great photograph of her and it shows so much about who she was and shows the kitchen that I, you know, remember loving as a child. So I really want to keep that photo. So even if it's not in great shape, there are a lot of things you can do to improve that. Also, don't forget to use other images as well, other things like letters, documents, paperwork, and things that can add some historical flavor and add some visual interest as well to your book. This is a letter to Tom's grandmother that I think it was the first letter that she got from her future husband. And so, you know, that's a nice thing to include in her book as well. This is another example of a book in which we use the woman's passport photos, and this book also has things like ration coupons from the war and a number of things like that sort of show a little bit of the history of the time and also just make really interesting visual elements to add to the book. Let's talk a little bit about proper scanning techniques, especially for print. One thing I want to emphasize is that when you are scanning photographs to use for a print project, you need a much different set of parameters than you do just for something that you're going to upload to a family blog or upload to Facebook. You need a much higher resolution to be able to get a good quality in print. These two pictures right here, the one on the left was scanned at a higher resolution. The one on the right is what it would look like if you download a photo, a low resolution photo from the internet and try to put it in, print it in a book. It's going to show the flaws. Print, although something might look great on the screen, When it's printed, if it doesn't have the proper resolution, it's going to show the flaws much more readily than would show up on the screen. So you need to be careful of that. First thing is clean your scanner. Wipe the dust off of your scanner. This is a bit of an exaggerated picture here, but you'd be surprised. It seems to me to go without saying that you should, wipe the dust off of your scanner and off of your pictures before you scan anything. And I do it between every single photo because you don't know what might be stuck to the photo before that might have been left behind on the glass. So you will save yourself a whole lot of photoshopping time later if you just simply make sure that your scanner is clean and that the photo itself is dusted off before you scan it. So let's talk about print resolution. The one on the left, this is our logo that is this is taken from a low resolution 72 dots per inch web resolution file. The one on the right is a much higher resolution at about 300 pixels per inch. So we're going to go through those numbers in a minute here. I also want to say that there is on our blog at picturesandstories.com we have articles on all of these topics that go into this in detail, and there's one specifically on how to scan photos for print that will give you all this information if you want to go back and refer to that. Now this one on the left, it was scanned at 72 pixels per inch, which is a standard web screen resolution, is either 72 or 96 pixels per inch. What you need for print is at least 300 pixels per inch. So the one on the right has been scanned properly at 300, and you can see it doesn't have those sort of blocky edges that the one on the left does. Sometimes this is tricky. This is probably one of the most heartbreaking problems that we have when people come to us with their photos all scanned and they're ready to have us lay out their book. And they say, okay, we scanned everything, and they had just used the automatic setting, the easy scan or whatever on their scanner, which oftentimes defaults to 72 pixels per inch, which is, as we said, screen resolution. And so they end up with all of these photos that are too small to really get a good quality in their book. So you want to make sure that whatever your scanner, that you go into your scanner driver, no matter what no matter what type of scanner you have, and you're going to find something that says output resolution in your scanner driver. And usually you have to go into the sort of more advanced settings to be able to find that. And you want to make sure that it's set at least at 300 pixels per inch. Sometimes you'll need more than that, which I'll show you in the next slide here. So if you have a photograph that's 2 by 3, your original print is maybe 2 inches by 3 inches, and you want it to appear in your book at the same size, at 2 by 3 inches, you're going to scan that photo at 300 pixels per inch, and that'll give you plenty of resolution to have it look good when it's printed. However, if you decide that you want to blow up that photo and you want it to appear larger than your original print in your book, you're going to need more pixels than that. So you can scan it at 600 pixels per inch, and that'll give you twice as many pixels to work with. That'll give you enough to either blow it up, or also if you want to crop a photo. If you just want to take a small portion of a photo, you're going to need more pixels to do that as well. So you want to make sure that you bump up that scanner resolution appropriately so that you have enough pixels to work with. If you want to take a small photo and make it into a full page, you may want to scan it at 800 or 1200 pixels per inch, which will give you a much bigger file, and it'll take a lot longer to scan. But if it's a really special photo and you want to do it in a full page, that's the kind of resolution that you'll need. One thing you don't want to do is to add pixels in your photo editing software. And we see people that have tried to do this where they take some photo that they've downloaded from the internet that's 72 ppi, and they say, okay, well, I can just open this in Photoshop and I can make it 300 ppi. It doesn't really work, and I'll actually show you on my computer what happens. Here we've got this picture of this cute little girl. She's looking, awfully cute here. This is a really pretty small file, okay? Now, this shows as the document size, it shows it as being, almost 8 by 6 inches. Okay, that would be a nice size, to put this photo in a book. However, what you have here, the resolution that it shows is 72 pixels per inch. So it looks great on your screen. But if we were to zoom in on that, then you start seeing all these little weird blocky, square JPEG artifacts, these little problems, especially around any areas that have edges to them, like eyes and lips and hair. So you start seeing these flaws. And these flaws are going to show up much more on the printed page than they do in your screen. So if you're looking at this image here that looks great on your screen and you try to print it the same size in your book, it's going to look not very good. And if you try to take this same photo and you open it up in Photoshop and you say, well, I can actually change this to 300, and I'll actually do it right now to show you. You can see that, okay, now you've got a lot more pixels here to work with. You've got 300 pixels per inch, your pixel dimensions are a lot higher, it's a much bigger file, but you haven't improved the photo at all. It's just taken the bad pixels that were there and just made more of them, but it doesn't improve the quality of your photo. So that is not going to help you as you're dealing with your photographs. So just make sure that as much as you can that you get the proper resolution to start with. With slides, you want to make sure that now slides are much smaller, so they're pretty tiny. So you want to make sure that you use an even bigger resolution for that. If you have a dedicated slide scanner, or if you are taking your scans to Costco or to some other place to have your slides scanned, make sure that they're scanned at least 3,600 pixels per inch. That will give you enough to print something that's 12 by 18 inches. If you're going to want to print something, make a big, huge print for your wall or something, then you may need more than 3,600. But for a book, generally, 3,600 is a pretty good standard to aim for when scanning your slides. Let's talk just for a minute about the file formats that you want to use for scanning. We always recommend that if you are scanning for print, that you scan as a TIFF file rather than a JPEG file. A TIFF file is, it's called an uncompressed file. It doesn't try to smash any of the pixels down to be able to fit them into a smaller space the way a JPEG does. A JPEG is meant more for web and internet use, for screen use, than it is for print. That's not to say that if your scanner will only scan as a JPEG, that you can't use those files. You just have to be very careful how you handle them after that. But if you have the ability on your scanner to scan as a TIFF, we would highly recommend that, and I'll show you why. It does make a much bigger file and it takes up more space on your hard drive, but it will be worth it. If you can scan as a JPEG, if you handle it properly. The main thing that you want to do is look at the quality setting on your scanner driver. You want to make sure that whatever setting is in there that handles your compression rate, that you want to set it for maximum quality. Sometimes it's a slider from 1 to 12, and you want to make sure that slider is slid all the way up to 12. Sometimes it just says, good, better, best, maximum. You always want to choose the highest quality setting if you are scanning as a JPEG, and that will give you a file that's good enough to print. Another thing about JPEGs is that you don't want to open a JPEG, edit it, and then resave it, and do that a number of times, because every time you do that, the JPEG is going to compress a little bit more and get smaller and smaller. And you could, if you do that enough times, you can end up with a damaged file. And this is just another example of a JPEG file that is overly compressed. Also, this goes for if you're taking pictures on a camera, whether it's a camera like this or a point and shoot or even a cell phone. You want to make sure that if you ever might want to print this photo that you're taking, that you have your camera set on the highest quality setting. And you can always make a file smaller, but you can't get back pixels that you don't have in the first place. And we're finding this more and more in trying to do books for people that find photographs online that they want to use. Anytime that you have the ability to scan an original print, or someone else has scanned a high-resolution print and you have access, or a high-resolution file and you have access to that, use that whenever possible. But sometimes you have, you downloaded a photo from somebody else's family blog and they don't have the original, or you don't know how to contact them, and that's really the only photo that you have, and it's a great photo and you really want to use it, but it's at 72 ppi and that's your only choice. If that truly is your only choice, just keep it small in your book. You're not going to be able to do, blow it up onto a full page like it shows on the right side of this page spread. You're going to have to keep it small. In fact, the photo on the left-hand page here is probably even a little big if you have a small 72 dpi photo. So if that's the only photo that you use, just keep it very small. This is a little infographic that I did, which is on our blog at picturesandstories.com, and basically it shows how you can, if you start large, you want to start large and then go small. So you're going to start scanning at a high resolution with a TIFF file and use those larger files for your print jobs, and then make JPEG copies of your TIFF files for web use. To upload to Facebook, to upload to Family Search, for those kind of, to email to people that they need to be lighter and faster to be able to travel over the internet. But keep your large files pristine, and then make copies, smaller copies, to use for other purposes. Autocorrection, we talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago. There are a lot of things that you can do to improve a photograph pretty easily now. This one was corrected, just has a simple kind of color shift over time, and this was corrected with Photoshop. However, a lot of the scanner drivers now have automatic correction tools that you can use, that it will improve the photo as it's scanning it, and that can be really useful. I like to just have a raw scan to work with and then be able to go in Photoshop, because I have more control in Photoshop over how I want that to appear and the color cast and everything. And that's because I'm very experienced with Photoshop. But I think for the most part, for most people, using the automatic improvement tools in your scanner driver, you can end up with a better quality photo. So I would just recommend that you try it out on your scanner. Try it both with and without those autocorrect tools and see which one turns out better. And if there's one that kind of looks weird because of whatever the autocorrect did to it, you can always go back and rescan that as a raw file and then tweak it yourself. But just try it out and see what works better on your scanner. If you have a really severely damaged photo, there are a lot of places where you can go now to have that digitally restored, and sometimes it's really worth doing that. If you have a great photo but it's really a mess and you want to use it, you might want to check into those services. It's not nearly as expensive now as it used to be. I have a question on the board from Tina. She says, do you scan documents and letters the same way? Are they saved in TIFF too? I would say generally yes. I scan anything that is going to go go in your book. I just treat them all as image files. A lot of people are used to scanning documents as PDFs, and you can use a PDF in your book as well. But I just think generally, TIFFs and JPEGs are a little easier to work with most of the other software that you're working in. Sometimes there's certain software programs that maybe, they don't like PDFs so much, or other file formats might trip them up a little bit. So I just generally, scan them all the same way and keep it all consistent. Okay, Diane says, do you do your photo editing on the original TIFF file or a copy of it and then save a copy as a JPEG? Yes, I would highly recommend that. Any editing that you want to do on your photo, if you want to go in and correct the color, or if you want to erase somebody out of it, or if you want to, fix a red eye, any kind of editing that you want to do that on your TIFF, because you can keep making edits to that as many times as you want, and the TIFF file won't degrade. It won't compress after making those edits. And then you can make a JPEG copy for other uses after that. So, and if you can't scan your files as a TIFF, if your scanner doesn't have that as an option, then you can scan it as the highest quality JPEG, and then you can open up the JPEG in your photo editing software like Photoshop or some other program, and you can actually save it as a TIFF, and then you can make your corrections on the TIFF file. You can also use, if you have Photoshop, you can use the native Photoshop.psd format as well, and that will work also. That's an uncompressed file, so you can do your editing in that format as well. And then when you're ready to use it or upload it to Family Search or something, then you can make a JPEG copy of the edited file. Just one thing I want to say, if all of this is really confusing to you, and if you're really struggling with the technology behind scanning your photos, it's really not that expensive to have someone else scan them these days. So, you know, if this is the part that's really tripping you up and stressing you out, go ahead and get some help, or you might want to consider actually hiring someone to scan your photos or taking them to an agency that will do that, because we don't want you to get hung up on this part of the process. Okay, after you have your photos all scanned, your next thing that you want to do to get ready for to put your photos in your book is to add the captions for your photos. And you want to get a caption list. It's easier if you do that before you actually start putting your photos into the book, because it'll make it easier when you get to the layout stage to have all that information at the ready at your fingertips. So essentially there are different ways to do that, to either come up with a caption list or to add the captions directly to your digital files. And essentially it's the digital equivalent to writing on the back of a print photo. Here's one way to do it, is that you can just write up a caption list just in a Word document. Just open up a Word document, and you're going to type on the left, you're going to just type the name of the photo, whatever your file name is that you have, and then you're just going to type next to it the caption that you want to go with that photo. Then if you have this open on your computer, whether if you're doing your own layout or if you've hired a designer to lay out your book, it's really easy to just go in and cut and paste this information into a caption box, and it's already there, it's already done. You don't have to be thinking about it as you go along. You can also add captions to the metadata of each photo. The metadata is the information, the digital information that travels with the photograph, and it can include information like copyright. It can include the camera data, like what f-stop it was shot at and what date the photograph was taken, that type of thing. But also you can add metadata to your photos. So you can add captions, you can add tags or keywords that will help you find your photos. So there are ways to add this information to a photo that you already have in your system. This is just an example of in Picasa, if you like Picasa for organizing your photos, and if you're using that, they have a caption function. You can see you just open up the photo and you just type in the caption box underneath what is in that photo. And that way, if you share that photo with someone else, that metadata should travel with that digital photograph to wherever it is you're sharing it or wherever you're posting it to. You can even put your contact information in there if you're going to be sharing these photos a lot online, and then people can contact you if they have questions about the photographs. This is another example of, this is what it looks like in Adobe Bridge, which usually comes with Photoshop. I think in some versions of Photoshop Elements it's actually sort of has become part of Photoshop and is not a separate program now, but there's a description field in there, so that's where you would type your captions in. They also have a keyword field that you can type in keywords if you want to maybe type all the names of each person that are in the photo or other identifying information. You can do this in Windows Explorer. I think you can also do it in Mac Finder too. There's So you don't necessarily need to have any separate software to do this in. So essentially in Windows, if you just have you have a photo selected in Explorer, and you usually have to make a big enough window so that this bar shows up downtown, but you'll see there's a title downtown, down at the bottom. My brain is a little fuzzy this morning, I apologize. But there's a title field down here that you can type your caption into that. So you don't even need any fancy software to do this. You can do it right in your Windows software if you're on Windows. And as I said, I think Mac has a way to do this too. I just don't have a screenshot of it. One thing you don't want to do is open up your photo in Photoshop and type the caption directly on the photo. We've seen quite a few clients do this, and that the reason that you don't want to do this is that, first of all, it's not editable once you flatten the file, or once you type it on there and save it. You can't really remove it again easily unless you have a layered Photoshop file. But the other thing is that if you make your photo bigger or smaller, that's going to affect the readability of the caption. So, and if you want to make that photo smaller, it might make your caption too small to read. And you sort of take out the flexibility out of that. So you want to make sure that your captions are separate from the actual photo and that you're not typing them directly on the photo. One thing that we find is really helpful as you are getting ready to put your book together is to create an index print. Just print one off of all of the photos that you have that you might want to use for your book. And generally, you can pull all the folders or all the pictures that you're going to use into a folder or a set of folders for this particular project. And then you can print an index print or a contact sheet. You can do this in Photoshop. You can do it also in Windows. There's a way to actually print out a sheet like this, and basically just has thumbnails with the name of the file underneath the thumbnail. And then you can go through and you have an actual printed copy that you can draw on. So you can circle the ones that you want to use. You have an easy to use reference right there in front of you and with the file name. So that can make it easier to have that printed off. It's also a nice thing to actually, once you have all these photographs together, to share them or even include them with your book. And this is something that we'll do for our clients when we're doing a book for them, is that we usually also do a little photo archive book, like a mini book that goes along with their history book. And it just contains a disc with the photos on it that were used in the book, all the high resolution photos, and just a little index with the file name. So that way those photos can also be used for, if your child has a school project that they're doing about their grandmother, they have access to all those photos. You can share them easily with family members. You can upload them online. So that's a nice thing to do as well. So once you've sort of chosen what photos you want to use, and once you have your text completed, so all of your editing is done and your text is pretty much ready to go, you want to indicate before you start your layout sort of generally where those photos are going to occur in relation to your text. And it's good to sort of figure this out ahead of time before you actually start trying to put your book together. So usually what we will have our clients do when we're laying out their book, or if you're doing it yourself, this is a good thing to do for yourself as well, and that is to just print out just a draft hard copy of your text. So that you have that on paper in front of you. Then you're gonna have your index sheet next to you, and then you can just write in the margins here. You're just going to write, make little notes on, okay, this is about where I want this photo to go, and then you'll have this as a reference when you're laying out your book. Or if you can give this to your book designer, and they will have a reference and know approximately where those photos should go. It makes it much easier and much faster and less confusing during the layout process. So this is one way you can do it. If you want to do this on the computer, you can take your Word file, and you can also actually type the photo references right in the Word file as well, whichever way you're more comfortable doing it. But sometimes I think, just for me personally, I love my computer and I do everything on it, but there's certain things that just my brain organizes a little better on print. And this is one of those that I like to be able to have a piece of paper that I can write this on and erase things and kind of draw things out. It just helps with that process a little bit for me, but whichever way you're more comfortable with. Let's see, how am I doing on time here? Okay. I'm going to go through the rest of this quickly because I want to leave some time for questions at the end. So we're almost done here. So if you do have any questions about all of this information we've quickly thrown at you today, please go ahead and type those in. Just sort of a last-minute checklist to make sure that you are ready to lay out your book. If you do these things, it will save you so much frustration. It'll save you time. It'll save you money if someone else is doing the design of your book. The more organized you are when you go into it, the better off you're going to be, both for yourself or whether you're hiring someone else to do it. So you want to make sure that your text is complete and that it's been proofread. That doesn't mean that once you start the layout process that you can't make changes to your text, because you can, but it will just make it more, the more changes to your text that you are doing after your photos begin to be laid into your book, the harder it's going to make to, the more things will shift around and it will just make it harder. So as much as you possibly can, make sure that your text is as complete as possible. You want to make sure that your photos are organized and preferably put in the order that they will appear in the book. That'll make it easier for you and for your either for you or for your designer. You want to make sure that you have a caption list for all of your photos, or that the captions are entered into the metadata of your files, and that you have the placement of your photos indicated in your text, either on a paper copy or in the digital copy of your text file. So I know we've given you a lot of information in a really short period of time. Next week we will talk about the process of putting your book together, taking the words and taking the pictures and putting them together in a pleasing way, and some options that you have for doing that. That'll probably be, for most of you, the most difficult part of the whole process. So we'll talk about all your different options and some different ways to do that next week. So we'll just open this up right now. If anybody has any questions on any of the things that we've talked about, as far as scanning, as far as choosing or organizing your photos. And Tom, anything that you want to add at this point?
No, just like to add emphasis that photos are just a wonderful part of your life, a book, and if you have them, use them. It seems that in times past we didn't have enough photos to tell our stories and to be a part of that, and now we have too many.
Yeah, now we have too many, and the hard part is figuring out which ones to use. Yeah,
so it's a matter of selection and finding the ones that are going to fit best, but what a great service you can do by including photos and spending the time to choose the ones that will have the most effect and be the most helpful in telling the stories that you have to share.
Karen's asking, can we get a podcast of what you've said? Yes, we will. We have recorded this webinar, and we will be making this available on an unlisted YouTube channel. If you email me after the webinar is over, and I'll go ahead and type my email address in here, but if you email me, I will send you the link to today's, and you can watch this again. Also, a lot of this information is in articles on our blog. At picturesandstories.com. So I'm going to go ahead and put my email address in here now. I can type and talk at the same time. Apparently not. Okay. So it's Allison at picturesandstories.com. Oh, and Tom just pointed out it's also on the slide on your screen. So go ahead and email me, and I would be happy to send you the links, and also links to the previous webinars that we've done. Joan says, if I do my metadata in the Photoshop Elements program, will it be available to read in other programs? The answer to that should be yes. Generally, and we've done this a lot, where we've taken clients' photos out of, they have theirs in Picasa, and we copy them over and we open it up in Photoshop, and the metadata is still there. It should travel from one program to another. Sometimes it might be a little bit hard to find where that is, because the different programs have different fields that they put that information in, but it should be there. Tom says, do we need a new link to access each newly recorded session? Yes, because we won't have the link until after we process this file. So if you have the links to the past sessions, it's a separate link to actually watch this section. And Joan, hopefully I answered your question well enough about the metadata. But that's one really nice thing about using that metadata, is that you can share that photo and have the information in the metadata travel with the photo. Another thing that you can use with the in the metadata are keywords or tags. And I don't tag every photo that comes into my computer because I just don't have the patience for it, and it takes too long, and I'm not quite that obsessively organized. I know people that do that, and you know, especially with people who are dealing with really large volumes of photographs. I generally I kind of use more of a sock drawer approach to organizing my photos. It's like, you know, the socks go in the sock drawer and the underwear goes in the underwear drawer, because if you know, you don't have to have all of your socks alphabetized or, you know, or arranged by color. You know that you can go to that sock drawer and find a pair of socks. And it's kind of the same way with organizing your photos. If you have some general you know, maybe you want to break them down by chapter, so you have one folder for each chapter of your book, and you're just going to throw that photo into that folder. You're going to be able to find it pretty easily. So you don't necessarily have to you know, tag every single photo. However, one instance when that's really it's a great idea to tag or use keywords for your photos is if you have if you have a family photo of a large family group, and you have different folders maybe for different people in your family, and that's how you've organized your photos, and you don't want to make separate copies of that photo to go in every file. Or maybe you do. I've done that from time to time. But an easier thing to do is just to go into that photo and type in the names of all the people that are in that photo into the keywords or into the metadata, and then you can do a search, and you can say, show me all the pictures of Elmer Armstrong, and it'll bring up all the pictures that have the keywords Elmer Armstrong in your metadata. So that's also a really great way to find pictures if you have a lot of them. Joan says, I have just right-clicked on a picture, go to Properties, Detail Data, and there's a place there to do it. That's perfect. So that works if you have Windows. On Mac, you don't have a right-click, but there's probably a way to do it there too, I'm sure. So, yeah, thanks for that suggestion. Susan says, I missed last week if you talked about the program to use to write the histories. No, that's what we will talk about next week. We're going to be going over all of the various options that you have in order to actually make a book. So we'll talk about that in detail next week. If there are any other questions, we'd be happy to take them at this point. As I said earlier, on our blog, there are articles about all of these subjects, about using metadata, on scanning your photos. There's all kinds of great information, and we add, we do about 3 posts a week adding new articles. So there's always new information and detailed educational information on our blog. So you can always go to picturesandstories.com and go to the blog and just scroll down through the articles. We also have things categorized as far as pictures, technical information, and you can pull up everything in that category as well.
I'm just going to add, again, as Allison said, we'll be talking next week about putting it all together and creating a book. And just really the importance of that is to, you want to do something that's going to last, that's going to have value now and in the future. And there's never been a better day to do that than today. And the electronic world is great. I love it. It's wonderful. The way that we can save and share our pictures and stories electronically is great, but there's nothing like a book for something that will last and that you can know is going to be there on into the future and communicate without being, having the problems that can happen in the electronic environment. So use both, but a book is really a very wonderful thing, and we'll talk about that next week.
Okay, Joan says, on extra special photos, I've actually written a little story with it. I might even copy and paste it when I write my story down. That's a great idea to keep to actually keep little stories with your photos, and you can even put those in the metadata. And then they'll always travel with that picture. And there's nothing wrong with using large captions as well, especially if you're doing a book where you have a lesser amount of text, or if you don't have a really long narrative, but you have a lot of photos and you just want to give a little bit of information about each photo. Sometimes you can do a whole book with just pictures and relatively long paragraph or multiple paragraph size captions that will tell the story of those photos, and that's a great thing to do too. If you if you don't have the time to write out the whole story and write a big long narrative for a book, you can actually tell a really great story just with photos and with the small stories that go along with those photos. We just got just a few more minutes if anybody has any last minute questions or comments. As I said, next week we will be talking more about the options that you have to design a book, different programs that you can use, some tricks on how to do things one way or another using photo book software, using word processing software, which we don't recommend, and we'll tell you next week the reasons why, or using other design software, or deciding whether you want to actually have someone else do the design of your book. So we'll talk about all those different options and some things to consider when you're making those choices. So you can go in and make an informed decision before you lay out your book. But again, the main thing is that you don't want to try to add your photographs into your story as you're writing your story, because we have all kinds of clients that have come to us who have started doing that on their own, and then they say, oh, I keep putting my pictures in here, and then I change one word and it moves it all around and it bumps things off to different pages, and can you fix it for me? And of course we can, but usually what we do is we take it apart, we take the text and the pictures separately, and then we reassemble it in proper design software in a way that looks really nice, rather than trying to go and fix a Word document, because it's just really hard to do that. But we will talk about all those things next week. We thank you all for your time today and for joining us. And again, if you have any questions or would like to